Hello, everyone. Welcome to Leading with Agility, the show that uses the world around us to explore how leadership can be inspired by agility. As always, I'm your host, Arif, and I'm joined by...
Myself, Tika, your spring podcast co-host.
It is spring, isn't it? The weather is definitely turning. Although it's still a bit chilly outside here in London.
That's how it works, doesn't it?
That's how it works. So, today's episode, what are we talking about? Last week, TK, as you know, we both completed some complex client work, didn't we, with our team? And it was a very exciting experience, as it always is, doing the kind of work we do. But it was some of the feedback that we received that stood out and got us thinking, I think, a bit on today's topic.
Definitely, yeah.
Specifically, the feedback was around the diversity of our team, in terms of ethnicity mainly, but also gender. But more than that, it was also the style and background of our team and how they operated and the work they were doing, all very differently, but harmoniously around the goals that we had set out. So it got me thinking a bit more about why is this all important to us here at Humble when it comes to this idea of diversity.
It always has been quite important, but it was lovely to see some other people actually noticing. It
was, wasn't it? It's quite heartwarming when you're not getting that feedback from a client and someone you trust, and it's it does leave a nice, warm, fuzzy feeling. But yeah, I just thought there's plenty to unpack here and talk about why that's important. Why is it important for leaders out there? Why is it important for those of you listening? But I think before we get into the main crux of today's topic, a bit of context to set this out. Here in the UK, ethnic minorities make up only 10% of the workforce and hold only 6% of top management positions. Now, this is a Race at Work study, data coming from there. Quite stark, quite bleak. And then when we talk about pay gaps, then it's not great either. Most ethnic minority groups earn less on average than white British people. This was up to 12% in 2022. That's Office of National Statistics here in the UK.
Huge gap, isn't it? Yeah.
So it's quite a large gap. It might feel bleak when we're looking at data like that. So, we've got to just set that context as to why it's important here in the UK, especially, but across the world, wherever you're listening, I'm sure as well. But there is hope, and that's what I want to talk about today, about how we can combat this. And look, there's probably lots of material already out there, but there's some specific things I want to talk about, or we want to talk about, TK. Number one, as always, we're all about agile leadership. So we're going to talk about that, how leaders can go first when it comes to this issue of ethnic diversity, especially, how diverse teams can bring wider benefits, and finally, what Disney can tell us about all of this as well. So stay tuned for that.
A surprising twist, yes.
Yeah. Right. So let's get into it then. I think kicking off around this issue of vulnerability and leaders going first. One of the challenges for people like me, and I'm going to start there, minorities, I'm South Asian of heritage, they're, whether you're black or of any other ethnic background, and this is quite well documented, there is sometimes this fear of speaking up and being yourself. And there's some research behind that as well, around the link between how authenticity and being your true self in the workplace can lead to a greater sense of belonging. We can look at work by self-determination theory from Ryan and Dici, for example, to eminent scholars on this topic. And there are others out there who talk about this. And so the work exists, the scholarly work exists on that. And I think, why is that? What's the causes for that? And I wanted to unpack that a little bit to kick off the conversation. One of the kind of well-known patterns that exists is this idea of what's called code switching. And this is where people of minority backgrounds in the workplace, where they are in workplaces where it's majority white, shall we say, they change their behaviors. They change how they speak. They may change some of their outward cultural practices, whatever that might be.
Fit in better.
Yeah, to fit in better. But lots of it does boil down to speech, especially.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, TK, do you have any experiences yourself? And I know this is interesting. This is where it gets really interesting.
Yes, indeed, right. And it's an interesting one. And, there's definitely stories to tell. My perspective, it's actually, quite interesting, like having a pinkish skin, but when you open your mouth, you just sound different, right?
Yeah.
Being an immigrant myself. So definitely I can relate to code switching. This has happened a lot. So I previously worked a lot for American companies. And when I arrived to London, I decided to switch the way I speak because many people in the UK are bothered by an American accent or American spelling. And I decided to completely erase that. And, now when I mainly work with global clients, they're perplexed as to where my accent comes from. And that's an interesting one. But also, to maybe add on top of it, I think for me, it's the code switching is not necessarily only based on the way I talk. So there's an interesting thing I'll share. So with the pandemic, obviously, and the rise of when we met people online, and this still continues, it is quite cool because it's a lower cost way of meeting people. One of the first questions people ask is, where are you calling from? And this question bothers me a lot.
Yeah.
Because, you see a person's face, right? Okay, so we talk ethnic minorities. Now, obviously, people see your skin tone, complexion, and so on. They can guess, but they see a white person like myself. And the first question out of their mouth is, where are you from? Where are you speaking from, right?
Yeah.
Like if it freaking matters. And I will say I have lied a lot because I've been in many places, right? But if you say you're talking from, I don't know, a certain country, people will think about you in a certain way. If you say you're talking from a certain other countries, you definitely shape an image differently. Why the hell are we asking this question? And should we still? But that's a bit of a tangent, and it's a bit of an example of code switching.
I think that I don't think we'd call that code switching. There's probably more about there's something about the clash there of people's perception when they see you and look at you and what they perceive, and then you're doing something where you're trying to conform to what their perception is, isn't it? And so that in itself is its own challenge, and I can appreciate that for you.
I'm sure you have some stories yourself.
Yeah,
right?
But for me, code switching is very different. It is about how I speak, and how I speak right now. What I'm doing literally right now, I am code switching. I feel like I'm code switching because I'm putting on a way of talking, and my voice, I'm altering it to make it come across so that it fits in, and that is so ingrained in how I am and who I am that I've stopped thinking about it actively. It is natural. It just happens. So when I'm not in my work setting, I don't necessarily talk like this. I don't talk like this with my kids. I don't talk like this with my family. I speak a different, I have a mother tongue of my own, right? And I speak with that kind of accent, when I'm around people who are close to me, loved ones, what have you. And even when I'm out and about, generally speaking, I'll probably, stick to that as well. I think something does happen, maybe consciously for me, when I step into this kind of space, and where there's this kind of expectation of, I have to appear different, or I have to talk differently for me to be accepted, and that that is sad to some extent. But it's just the reality that I have to deal with, being a ethnic minority in this country. I think I don't really let it affect me. But when I've been, doing the research for this episode and reading up on other people's experiences, it can be quite affecting for people. It can be quite debilitating. I was looking at some examples of, you mentioned the pandemic and remote work, and we covered remote work actually in our last episode, didn't we? So there's a connection here to code switching. Sorry, in remote work, and this was a fascinating little detail that I picked up was when now more people are working from home, there's this obviously expectation of having the video on and, attending Zoom calls, team calls, etc. And I actually can relate to this, which is that, my housing situation, I'm not the most affluent person, right? I don't have a dedicated office space in my house. I'll be honest and open. I do it from my bedroom because I don't have anywhere else. I'm housing in London is, difficult as it is, as you know, TK, from past experience. So I'm so conscious of that. I kind of angle and make sure that my, video background doesn't reveal or tries not to reveal the fact that, because I'm embarrassed about that. I'm going to openly admit that here on this podcast. And when I was reading the experiences of other people, they were saying the same thing. They felt like, okay, I'm at home. Maybe I live with my parents, or I have my family at home with me, whatever. So I don't want to show evidence of that because I don't want to give a particular vibe to my coworkers and my employees. And that, to me, is another form of code switching. So it's really
absolutely
fascinating.
Right. But I think, Arif, it's very sad to hear, that you believe this needs to happen for yourself. I can only share a story that I had some old furniture which was functional, and someone on LinkedIn left a comment that, "Oh, TK, nice old school furniture." And it bugged me so much that I had to do a complete refurnishing of my room. And now I've got a beautiful green screen and so on, right? And I feel the same as you, right? But I thought to myself, okay, well, it's something I have to embrace, right?
Exactly. And it's all about this, having to fit in, having to appear different, having to...
in a certain way.
Yeah, be a certain way because you feel like you're not... Okay, are you going to be accepted? You don't know what the other person's thinking, but I'll tell you one thing.
Especially when you put yourself out there in public, right?
Exactly. And then when you are, I suppose, for me, being born here and growing up and then seeing, okay, who are the types of people who do the types of things in the world? Okay, let me break that down in a bit more clearly. What I mean by that is you build up this perception that there are certain groups of people who get to do certain things in life, and there are other groups of people who rarely get those opportunities. And so that means if I were to ever want to aspire to be in that position, I have to change who I am. And that is dangerous, I think. So anyway, there's so much, and I probably won't be able to do justice to all of this in this episode. But
maybe one of the next ones.
Yeah, one of the next ones. And I think there's a lot to unpack. And let's I think, switch back to what I started the episode with around leadership, right? And why I believe, or why I think you'd agree, TK, leaders need to kind of take this kind of first step to make it okay for employees to be themselves, to show who they really are and be authentic, and maybe not have to code switch as much. That's what I would love to see in the world, in the workplace. I don't know.
I would love to see it myself. It's obviously dangerous and difficult because if you do not code switch, you have to suffer the fate of maybe not being accepted. And obviously it hurts. And we all, as human beings, know how much it hurts. To get the feedback or, to get the look, to get whatever you get as information, to see that your behavior is strange and it doesn't belong. And it takes a lot of courage and, as you say, our vulnerability to be able to do that. Many people struggle with that, and I think most people would struggle because the instinct of belonging, the need for affiliation is incredibly strong and evolutionary ingrained in us, right? For some people, it's like the fear of public speaking, the fear of showing yourself publicly. Being an outcast is a fate worse than death for many people in their minds.
Yeah, it's can be quite debilitating. You're right.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, what do we do about this? I mean, do leaders need to now adjust the working environment? Do they need to celebrate, the diverse nature of their employees, whether they're culturally, identities, whatever? What needs to happen? I have a thought on this I want to share, but TK, do you want to add anything first? I mean, do you think there's some things that, leaders need to do in terms of,
Well, we get into positive affirmative action when it comes to something you need to take. But when it comes to the actual vulnerability, it's okay. So it's harder to do, but practically it's quite easy. So I can give an example. I'm actually, and being a leader myself, I am going live on LinkedIn every day, talking about my work with clients, my life, and demonstrating the way I am, because I think to myself, okay, so as a consultant, as a coach, people buy me, people buy yourself, Arif, people buy our team in Humble Associates, right? And I want them to see the real me. And yeah, sometimes I might be going too far, and that's fine, right? I'm going live because I don't want to edit it. I want it to go on as soon as I say it, so I'm not tempted to, maybe have second thoughts about it.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's a good example of doing it.
I guess a bit of extreme, right? But hey, a real one.
So taking that cue, we all know, well, I'm sure many of our listeners are familiar with Professor Amy Edmondson, who's done a lot of work already on psychological safety, right? That's where she's kind of made her name, I suppose. But she's more than that, of course. And like us, she loves talking about leadership too, and probably far more qualified. Well, not probably. She is far more qualified than us. But she talks about leaders needing to be more vulnerable. And in her view, it is leaders who take that first step of demonstrating vulnerability, then make it okay for everyone else. Now, I'm going to come on to some of that, or we're going to talk about some of that with, I mentioned Disney at the start later on. But for now, let's just focus on the vulnerability aspect in a little more detail. And in her view, she advocates, or she makes she makes a statement that given how complex and uncertain the world is around us, and hey, we're talking about agile leadership, aren't we? That's why we think it's important. It requires a different type of leadership. This constant, change and uncertainty demands learning and adaptability and agility, right? It needs leaders who are able to adapt to what's going on, and that means they need to be aware of what their limitations are. They don't know everything. They can't have the answers for everything, and so they need a degree of humility to be able to accept that there are others around them who may possess the answers, and they need to leverage that potential in order to, collaboratively get to the right answer. And I think that is a really nice way that Amy describes how our ideas on agile leadership mesh with this idea of leaders being vulnerable, and that can contribute to more, hopefully, diverse teams. I don't know.
It absolutely can, right?
What are your thoughts?
But I want to address one thing, because many people, a different way or a different name for showing vulnerability is showing weakness. In fact, let's call it that, right? And many leaders, many people have been taught, raised, and trained and conditioned all their lives not to show weakness.
Exactly. You are right. And
we need to address that a bit, because, for many people, a leader is the last person that needs to show weakness. So it's interesting to contrast these views and ask ourselves, why have we been taught to lead this way if we have? And are we doing that? And is it really working for us?
And she makes the same point, and she says that for leaders, when they make a mistake, they must admit it and apologize. Now, we've talked about this in previous episodes already, but it's interesting how this is a persistent challenge that leaders, especially at very senior positions, have. The ability to admit when you're wrong. And that is showing, maybe, as you said, TK, weakness to some people, but it just shows that you're not invincible. You're just human at the end, right?
No one is, right?
Yeah, and as she says, you may experience when you refrain from admitting your mistakes when you refrain from admitting your mistakes, it's a short-lived and delusional, which is quite a provocative way of describing it. But I can see what she's talking about. It's not effective when you fail to admit you're wrong.
Yes, but I think it goes even deeper. I'm actually thinking, why is it the case that people feel they need to lead this way? And I think it's all buried in a conviction of the transactional nature of their behavior between leaders and the people that look up to them for leadership. So if you think that people that you lead are always trying to pull one on you and be very transactional and put as little value as they can, and you need to motivate them with your authority, dare I even say fear. If you believe that, this is a self-fulfilling prophecy. If it works for you, good luck. I don't think it works for me or us in Humble Associates, and for many other leaders, which we'll give you examples later on.
I'm sure we've got some stories, or we've seen this before. I don't know if you wanted to say anything on this. I mean, have you seen any examples of good vulnerability, if I can say it like that, or the benefits of leaders demonstrating this?
Okay, so I as always, you sometimes draw a blank. I know I can tell the story, but I forgot the company's name.
That's fine.
And it's sad that maybe they're not as successful. There's a Japanese printer company that is not that popular, which made some mistakes, and the leaders had to take a huge bow and completely restructure the organization. I'll probably find it and we'll put it in an article in the notes of the podcast. But I think, when it comes to political leaders in our own environments, sometimes they can admit a mistake, and it's just important to acknowledge that. I think leaders do admit mistakes. But we most often see leaders that don't, show defiance, right?
Yeah.
And, there was a conversation we had about, I forgot his name. There's this famous case of a Spanish Football Association leader that, with the kissing of the wonderful women of the women's. And he was staunch, sending, no, I haven't made any mistakes. That's perfectly okay.
Well,
even though, was really pushed out.
He's now going to jail, which is good.
Yeah.
So
there you go.
That was the news I read the other day, or yesterday, I think. 30 months jail sentence, something like that. Well, serves him right. No, you're right. So there is mixed. We've seen different examples of it, but let's just move the conversation on a little bit and assume that we have, as you said, TK, a leader who is doing his or her best, demonstrate this vulnerability. Why should they then bother, increasing the diversity of their team? What benefits could that bring? Well, I'm going to answer that actually, which is that some studies have shown there are some actual benefits to surprise, beyond the obviously connections to what we started the podcast about when I was talking about pay gaps and disparities in employment. Beyond all of that, there are other benefits, of course, around. For example, apparently, according to some studies, social science studies, diverse teams when we are talking about here ethnic diversity specifically, are more likely to constantly re-examine facts and remain objective. That's one observation from some of these studies, which is quite interesting, TK, isn't it? So there was a study basically talking about where they scientists assigned 200 people to 6-person mock jury panels whose members were either all white or included 4 white and 2 black participants. And then the people were shown a video of a trial of a black defendant and white victims, and then they had to decide whether the defendant was guilty. Now, I think you probably know where this is going, right? Where there were more homogeneous panels, i.e. people all looking the same, they made far more factual errors compared to diverse panels who made far fewer factual errors when discussing the available evidence. And if there were errors, they were more likely to be corrected during any conversation, discussion, deliberation. So that was one interesting observational data from this social science study. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, TK.
Well, it's the way you've described it veers close to racism.
Yes,
but
it does.
That could possibly be but another episode, as always. But what I think, as a person that really focuses on assembling diverse teams, and we got some positive feedback, as you said, Arif, humble brag. The reason we're doing it because we're doing it because we believe in it. But I would say that what we actually got as a positive feedback and what the person giving us feedback actually appreciated is how differently everyone has worked, behaved, looked like. It's like, them working with international consultancies when everyone is a white young dude in a suit, seeing us was a complete shocker. And seeing how everyone was doing things, even when we work with our team and work with this particular client or any client whatsoever, we always encouraged our people to add something of their own, right? We usually say, okay, we need to realize these goals. This is the way we do that. But make it your own. Add your own style, because this is what would make you best. Be yourself, which would make you be your best.
Yeah. No, you're bang on the money there, TK. And I think you mentioned something there around what they saw in this diversity, the result of that diversity, right? That's the powerful bit here. And just going back to what these studies are talking about, I've mentioned the ability to focus on facts, remain objective. There are other studies that demonstrate diverse teams can process facts more carefully, and others that also talk about teams being more innovative. So all of this together links directly to what you're saying, and I think it creates a more powerful image about, again, going back to what Amy Edmondson was talking about. Like, look, we're in a world where there's constant change, disruption, evolution. Things are constantly moving. If you want a team that's better able to respond to all of that, then you maybe think about this, because this could be the key to unlock that performance you're looking for. I think,
and you've captured the key word here, evolution, right? Yeah. So if we have different approaches in a single team, some of them will actually be better suited than others.
Exactly.
And because it's so different, it wasn't chaotic. It was actually full of the positive diversity, and some approaches actually worked better than others. Some actually had to change midstream to suit that, to change the default styles, to see, look, right, this hasn't been working. Your style works a bit better. Let me do it slightly differently because you've onto something here.
No, you're right. Exactly. That point about homogenous thinking, well, I've got something interesting to bring into the conversation on that. So our regular listeners will be, I'm sure, fully aware that a few episodes ago we discussed troubles at Boeing at long length. In the news this week, hot off the press, the current CEO, David Calhoun, has now decided to tender his resignation. Surprise, surprise. Well, but why am I bringing this up? Because when I was reading through the details of his hiring, which I missed the first time round, so I apologize to our listeners, but it's quite relevant to this point, is it turns out that when he was appointed in 2020, he was already a veteran of the group's board and served as chairman for a few months in the previous year. So it tells me that they hired in their own image. I wonder if that has had any impact into the performance of the company since. I wonder.
I mean, that's a dramatic take. I would say that, but if you look at the boardroom, you will actually see that. But, we work with senior leaders too, and members of the boards. And, sometimes it's actually not their fault. They're trying to be inclusive, but there's obviously the societal aspect of it.
Yeah.
And, it's what you said about, the code switching. And the glass ceiling, even if people try to tear it down, it's persistently there for very interesting reasons, which is probably another episode of the podcast.
Yeah, it probably is. Right, TK, I think we should take a break there and come back in a few moments. If you've been enjoying our podcast, we've just a treat for you. Every Friday at 9 a.m. London time, join us live on LinkedIn for an audio show to discuss the latest episode. To find out more, head to our podcast description and find a link to our LinkedIn page. See you there. Welcome back, listeners. And before the break, we were talking at great length about homogenous teams and also challenges with perhaps not hiring in a diverse manner and creating a diverse team. But now I want to move the conversation on to looking ahead. What can we do with all of these challenges? And as you said, TK, before the break, there's probably other episodes we can probably go down and explore. You know, you mentioned racism, you mentioned maybe the structural aspects. There's lots to unpack. But talking about what we have been talking about, I wanted to bring in the story of Disney, because I think there's some really interesting and hopefully helpful ideas that we can learn from and absorb.
That's what we're all about.
Exactly. Now, Jamie Wolf is the former director of culture at Pixar Animation Studios, and she recognized many of the challenges we've been discussing. We talked about vulnerability. We talked, of course, around code switching, conforming, how leaders need to demonstrate all of this and put their, step forward first and show this vulnerability to help more marginalized or ethnic minorities to be able to share their experiences more comfortably and be authentic in the workplace. And she did this, or she tried to solve this in two ways. And I think it's worth, let's talk a little bit about that with the time we have left. The first thing she did was a mentor program. And this focused on these disparities we're talking about. We've got perhaps more privileged leaders, maybe from a more privileged white background, a benefit of decent educations or access to wealth or whatever it is that have given them the ability to get the roles they have. And then employees who maybe are lower down in the ladder or are more junior or may come from very different cultural backgrounds where they didn't have wealth, they didn't have access to opportunities, etc. And she thought, well, look, there's got to be something here where we can create a mentor program where mentors of leadership in leadership roles can then match with mentees in a non kind of structural relationship, in a mentor-mentee relationship, and really get to know each other better so that they can build trust and intimacy. And I thought this was a quite interesting approach to solving some of these challenges. I don't know.
These programs are usually a great idea for any kind of diversity. Is just helping because it's also a way of paying forward, right? And the clients we work with, we actually implement a mentoring scheme right now, and it's a lot of value, and we get a lot of engagement from these mentors, helping the young leaders grow. Obviously, it's not necessarily a focus on diversity here, but mentoring programs are great, and I'm happy to see that they also help with this particular issue.
And the advantage that Pixar found in this example was that they, very, very quickly, mentors realized they got to know more about challenges mentees faced. We haven't talked about, for example, power dynamics. That's another aspect of this conversation, but that's one area that they got to learn a bit more. Social disadvantages, cultural differences, they got to learn all of that. But the end result of all of that was, okay, so what's the point, you might ask? Well, it meant that mentors, by having all of this knowledge, armed with that, they were able to stand up for these colleagues post-program and advocate for them. And hopefully, I think it led to creating better opportunities for them to grow and succeed in the organization. I think that's a fantastic approach to solving some of these challenges, TK.
And I definitely agree. If you don't have a mentoring program in your organization, get in touch with us.
Always a shameless plug. But I think on this point of diversity, let's look at what Pete Docter, who's the current Chief Creative Officer, talks about. And we talked about the authenticity at the start of this conversation. And I think this is really amazing. What he says is that, look, at Pixar, it obviously, as we know, they're in the movie business, and they tell fantastic stories. I think most of us who are listening probably have seen a Pixar movie at some point in our lives, whether as children or as adults. And I think children and adults enjoy them either way, right? And what is it? There is something about their storytelling. And I think this is the key thing Pete says. He says, we ask our directors to make movies about themselves. That is the key thing. I think that's really interesting. And if you just zoom out for a moment there, what we just talked about, creating that mentor program, getting to know, employees from a diverse backgrounds and giving them opportunities and helping them grow, that can only create for a far richer and diverse storytelling output, can't it? Because if all these people having the opportunity to tell their stories, imagine, we have a far, amazing view of what the world looks like, I think. Maybe I'm going a bit too far here, but I don't know.
I don't think you are. I think, however, people need help, and mentoring definitely helps in getting a voice or getting a form or platform to tell their story. That's important too.
Yeah, no, it's really important. Now, the second thing Jamie discusses in the article I was reading is they have a proactive policy of rewarding vulnerability. Now, this is really important, I think. Because as we've been talking about, and repeating again, we think it's quite important that leaders demonstrate this. But how do you actually reward it? Well, she says data suggests that only about a quarter of leaders develop the skills needed to create psychological safety for their teams. Oh. So, yeah,
it's not a lot.
Not a lot, is it? There's a big gap there for leaders to step in and do more. So that's why I think that informed their decision of, okay, no, we need to proactively address this. And one of the things they do is they have a different leadership program where people leaders especially, so these are HR, type roles, do an exercise where they map out their network, the existing network in the working environment. They say, okay, who are the people I've mentored, or who are the people I've line managed, who are the people I give advice to, or who seek out advice from me, etc. They do this kind of map, and they look at it and they say, okay, you now have 6 months to go and network with a different set of people. You need to network with people who don't look like you, who don't come from your background, who don't come from your tribe, essentially, and who don't maybe think like you. And that forces them to then go and create new relationships and new connections. That is brilliant, I think.
That's definitely brilliant. And when it comes to awarding vulnerability, I can talk about a program that I co-implemented.
Go on.
So we decided that it's really important to show vulnerability through celebrating failure.
Yes.
So what happened is we bought an unicorn-shaped pink balloon on a string filled with helium. We tied it to a box, so it floated, and we bought a couple actually because we did it for 6 months. So every time you messed up, you had an opportunity to claim this balloon and be a unicorn of vulnerability until someone else took it from you, and you were supposed to take it to your meetings, your online sessions, in the meeting room, just to show that, hey, I'm proud of the mistake I've done.
Nice.
I'm not afraid to show vulnerability.
Wow.
Even by floating a pink balloon of a unicorn.
That's quite nice, isn't it? Humanizing everyone. And it's like everyone's
very
fallible.
Popular, actually. People ask a lot of questions. What the hell is that?
Yeah. I'm sure it was a great conversation start. Did you see what other changes did you see as a result in the workplace? What kind of observational or other kind of data did you get back from doing that?
The interesting thing was the team that I was a part of, a team of coaches and consultants in London, was definitely taken into that, and definitely it helped us to maybe think we're always right, but maybe stop this thinking. Sadly, we did it in an investment bank, and I don't think anyone else wanted to partake. So we were these unicorns there, and we did it for fun on one hand, but it really turned into a program to award vulnerability. But it only worked in London, even though we had our friends in other countries. No one wanted to pick it up. But maybe now in 2024, they might.
They might, yeah. Or maybe there were just some cultural differences, and perhaps, yeah.
Another episode of a podcast.
I think we've talked about 5 different episodes. That
I know, right? There's a lot. Note these ideas down.
Lot to unpack. But no, of course, if listeners have some ideas of their own, maybe if you want us to focus on something more specific that we've been talking about, then please do get in touch. Email us or reach out to us on LinkedIn. But yeah, back to what we were just talking about there in terms of what Pixar have done. I think the summary point there is it's about this idea of being proactive and intentional in what they do to create this more inclusive workspace. That's what it boils down to. Whether it's creating the mentoring program, TK, that you've talked about, we do, mentoring program that Pixar have created, or whether it's about their leadership program being more attuned to some of these behaviors and that they want to see in the workplace, either or both, I think are great examples of what organizations, and maybe this is a challenge to our listeners, you could think about how you can increase the level of vulnerability amongst leaders. How can you make it safer, more comfortable for your employees to be themselves and show up authentically in the workplace? Do you want to share any final kind of summary thoughts yourself, TK, on what we've been talking about?
I think as a leader, I'm not afraid to have these conversations about people feeling like they don't belong. But you can't just say, hey, Mr. Madam, what about your feeling of belonging? You need to share maybe some vulnerability yourself to build trust and say, look, right, I felt like I don't belong myself numerous times. And I understand that it can be a problem. So if you want to talk about it, if there's anything that's bothering you, I'm here to help because I've been through that myself. Maybe I have no idea about your particular problems, and I never will, but it's important that, we can be open about it, and it's something I really care about. So that's what I do as a leader, and I hope that some of you may possibly do a bit of it too.
Amazing. Thank you. I've got one final brief anecdote or story I want to share that I read, which I thought was a nice way for doing what you've just said. And it goes back to the remote working point. And this was an employee who was feeling very challenged about being vulnerable in the workplace. But with the advent of remote work, she said that, well, now what I see is that I see my manager on video calls at home with her children, being vulnerable herself because she's, trying to juggle motherhood with, being a manager. And it's made me think about her in a totally different way. And I actually feel like I can now open up and share more about who I am with her and be more comfortable around her as well. I thought, wow, that's a really nice story, a nice positive, I think, story as well. Just uncovering who you are and sharing more about who you are may be the, kickstart for others to do the same in your team.
Literally inviting others to your place.
There you go.
Showing vulnerability, isn't it?
Powerful, isn't it, TK? Well, that's all we've got time for. Thank you for listening, as always. We appreciate your listenership and your attention. And as always, we hope you enjoyed the episode. And please, if you haven't already, do subscribe and please do rate the podcast. Give it a rating. Give us some feedback, a review. It would really help us out. And pass the podcast on to a friend. So until next time, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.